Alright, so we finally have the final dual skill in the game. What does that mean for me? What does that mean for you? And is Arena any more tolerable now just because we have Colorless Duel Infantry 4? Let's find out.
Let the lesson begin.
What's up guys, Akariss here, bringing you another Fire Emblem Heroes video. Today's video is a bit overdue, but I wanted to make sure I did my due diligence here to give you guys the best advice I could. As always, I went through the options and I have basically compiled all the info here that I feel is best to help you guys inherit or potentially use Sea Duel Infantry 4 off of Yuri, either now or in the future. So of course you can always come back to this video and help yourself out with that. Now keep in mind a couple of things before we start here. Sea Duel Infantry 4 is basically an arena skill, so that means if you invest someone with this skill, then you're probably intending to use them in arena, and by the result of that, hopefully also care about your ranking and potentially the rewards involved with that, or potentially just make your arena experience more tolerable, easier, whatever that might be. However, I would like to point out that Sea Duel Infantry 4 and just Infantry 4 skills in general are actually pretty good in other modes too. I've had some success with them in AR and PvE content as well, especially those type of units that use all the stats well. So usually like tank units that can literally use every single stat. Really do appreciate the extra stats that a Duel 4 brings, which is HP plus 5 and 2 to all stats. More offensive oriented units, though, are definitely not going to care too much about this sort of thing. So yeah, with that being said, though, this will focus on Arena, and I will definitely try to explain why some of these options are better than others with an F2P perspective. So that's like Grail and 3-4-star units, and then some like orb premium type of investments as well that maybe you either are considering to plus 10 or might in the future. Again, all with Arena in mind, because that's where the skill is designed for. So yeah, before we begin, smash the like button, sub if you haven't already, always helps with the channel, and I appreciate getting that reach out to others so they can also be fully informed with this sort of thing. Let's do this. First off, I'm going to show you guys what I think about my tier list before we jump into Innes, who's going to be our first one, of course. So in my opinion, with the F2P options that we have, the best ones are the ones up there, those top three. Then we have the A, and rounding out is B. Anyone not listed here is basically, in my opinion, not worth considering. So you won't see a single healer here because healers just don't score enough for Arena, despite them being really good options and likely making your experience easier. They are literally a hindrance for bringing into Arena because they just don't have the right scoring options to help you out when it comes to, you know, ranking at the end of the day. So they're just not a good investment when it comes to dual skills. The ones here, I'm not going to cover all of them because this video would again take like an hour to go through every single unit, but I will cover what I feel is probably the most important ones to think about. Someone like Soth I actually covered recently in my Soth Resplendent video, so go check that out. If you want more details on Soth, I believe I even covered an arena build there, but I'll try to explain everyone's position here to kind of help you out further. Without a doubt, I do feel like Innes is in first place though, because he is a very unique unit, and I'm glad. This is ironic, of course, because like the previous video we talked about how we don't have too many unique units and units of good fodder, but thankfully Innes is actually like very good in both his role, his weapon, everything about Innes is very good, and he deserves Sea Duel Infantry 4. However, he doesn't necessarily even need it, and the problem is it's only like a very minor score increase from like a standard level 4 A skill to like 300 SP to Sea Duel Infantry 4. It's a very minor difference. You may not even want to make that investment if you're not really like pushing ranks as much as you can. So it's not necessary for him, and even something just giving him more throughput on his nukes will likely be better. But I still have to recognize that the investment is there for those that are the best in the colorless infantry role, and Innes is without a doubt going to be there. Now, the other ones may either confuse you or you may like be enlightened by their positions, and that's what I'll help you out here for. So I do weight units that have some sort of utility much higher than those that don't. So that's why something like Gangrel and Kronia are basically in last place. However, they could get refines and they could get a lot better. So keeping your eye on them is important. And they have unique mechanics like true damage or vantage that can really help you out to make your experience easier. However, they have basically no utility, and therefore they can't really be ranked any higher. The stuff like Fallen Takumi are great, Fallen Takumi and Akariss, because with like Akariss, you can basically take free hits at enemies. Takumi can do map-wide damage with panic and even splash damage, which is a really good supportive weapon in Arena. Stat spread isn't too bad either considering his age. So that's why I put them right up there, because being able to basically attack things for free is really good in Arena, especially if you're not hindered by wind sweep and denying your double, so you can use stuff like no follow-up instead. And with Takumi, again, lots of splash damage, map-wide control, and panic support just makes him a super solid candidate for Duel Infantry 4. You might be shocked to see Soth in like the rank under, but the problem with Soth is you kind of need to tailor your team more around him, as opposed to someone like Takumi and Akariss or Innis, so you can just throw onto any team and they're going to work. With Soth, to get the best benefit out of him, you're going to want other allies that use some sort of like specials like Ruptured Sky or Gale Force or Blue Flame or something, accelerate off of that, and maybe even try to get him out in some way. So he's a little bit awkward to use, but he is very strong when set up properly, and that's why he deserves near top ranking here. But I don't think he's necessarily the best option for Duel Infantry 4, despite his Resplendent, despite his really good weapon. He's more of an AR unit, in my opinion, than an Arena unit. Then you have stuff like Virion with his panic, and Gordin surprisingly has a really good weapon. If you forgot what it does, I will cover it. I'm actually going to cover Gordin. So like a daunt effect to lower enemy attack and defense, and he has Brave, which is great. And Matthew just has extremely powerful nukes when he's set up, so that's always great. And of course, dagger debuffs and whatnot. But anyways, let's start with the builds and get us thinking here. So I'm going to start with Innis and why he's so good. And basically, the reason he's so good is essentially just because he can, like, nuke things. Like, super nuke things, doesn't care about damage reduction. Combined with Ruptured Sky and his bow giving the whole, like, piercing effect, he can actually run something like Ruptured Sky, and you're going to see Ruptured Sky a lot because it is a really good special. He can run something like this and do some massive damage. And when I say massive damage, I mean literally massive damage, which is shown like right here in the simulation. So we have Innis here, who I'm just using attack speed 2 to supplement for Duel Infantry 4 in the simulator, but basically with the exact same build, you just give him 6 attack with Ruptured Sky versus a literal max invested Edelgard, which you can find in Arena, and he basically wins this duel, which is there's few characters that can do this, but Innis being able to do this, and you will see Fallen Edelgard in Arena, is a great thing to have. So with a small buff, either to drive attacks or 6 attack, rally attack plus, he's going to be able to kill Fallen Edel easily. And that's something that's very good in the current day, which will still age pretty well, because I don't expect like a lot of these characters are just going to randomly get damage piercing through their weapon and then be able to use Ruptured Sky. He's going to hold out pretty well, and he can do this to a lot of the cast, but I felt it was very notable to mention, of course, that he can basically just shut down a key meta unit and will likely age well because of that. But of course, we're not just here to talk about Innis, and I did cover Innis like a few months ago. I want to talk about some of the other stuff here, and we'll start with Takumi and why he's like where he is. So with Takumi, again, if you didn't hear it a little bit earlier briefly, he has extra attack and speed off his weapon. He's able to basically do splash damage, and that's so awesome for someone like him. His weapon's right there. And he does the splash damage. He does the splash damage with his AoE like on 2 different turns, turn 2 and 3. So you can actually set that up. And then if you do choose to make him engage on something, he can actually do even more splash damage. If you give him a level 4 300 SPC skill, you can actually give him Savage Bolt or Poison Strike in the seal combined with Wind Sweep and let him take like free pot shots at units and really double down on his ability to basically whittle down or just really suppress enemy teams. If there was a Duel Infantry 4 unit that probably deserves it, for those of you that are Takumi fans, it's going to be this version of him, and he's going to be one of the best if you ask me. But moving on, let's talk about Gordin. So again, this is like, I feel like a forgotten unit, but you got to realize how powerful a weapon like that can be. And that is because it's supportive in nature, but also because he has a decent attack stat and he has a brave weapon, which means that he's going to be killing many, many, many things. He can, anything that basically doesn't have a defense stat, Gordin will undoubtedly kill it, but also you can keep him near your allies to also help out their combat by lowering enemies' attack by 4 and defense by 4. Like, that is super strong. If you give him something like Deadeye with Times Pulse, potentially just set him up for a big nuke, he can do that as well. Give him some attack stat, some drive attacks, anything like that. He's a pretty solid candidate for C-Duel, which I feel is underappreciated. It's not like Klein where you're just basically applying chill defense and maybe hoping for a quad. With Gordin, you actually have some presence on the team that can debuff the foes, which I feel is underrated but very strong. It's also why Ashnard is good, or why Hanoka is good. In Arena, these type of effects aren't that common, so of course I wanted to give that shout out to Gordin. Before we move on though, I'm going to talk about the more premium options. I'm not going to cover all the F2P ones, but just kind of my opinion there. If you feel like you want to add to this, or you want even like more an expansion on it, then just feel free to ask in the comments, or you know, just provide your own opinion in the comments and I'll read them. I do usually read like all the comments even if I don't reply to them. So feel free to add your own input. But again, this is what I feel about C-Duel Infantry so far with the Sims and the ability that their weapons have at their disposal. Next up on the premium options though, I want to talk about these guys. So if you don't know what's going on here, basically Marianne, who was recently released, doesn't reach 180 BST, but with C-Duel Infantry 4, she can score the same as that, and because she's effectively a pseudo-dancer, she is the best candidate for C-Duel Infantry 4, in my opinion, probably even better than Innis or anything like that, because being able to use a dancer, especially if it scores max, is great. That's why Dual Peony is one of the best arena units you can use. And Marianne kind of ties into this. Even though her dance effect isn't as easy as just dance, it requires a bit of setup. It is very powerful, and I've had a lot of success with it in AR, which definitely would apply also to Arena by giving other actions. Any unit that can do more than a single action in a turn is going to provide good value, or give it to another one by also having their own action. That's fine too. Some of the other options here, again, you either might be confused or not, and I'll try to explain them. Shinin is unique as a C-Duel Infantry 4 unit because he can do close counter. So kind of like the Bowie effect here, and why Bowie's a decent G-Duel Infantry 4 unit, any unit that can essentially have a wider range of matchups is a more flexible unit, and therefore is very powerful in Arena. So not only is Shinin having a more modern stat spread, but he also can basically take advantage of all the stats, which is pretty rare for C-Duel Infantry, or just infantry skills in general, especially from Colorless. So he appreciates all the stats, he can run close counter, and then have a very wide net of matchups that are favorable. So that's pretty solid. The solo is unfortunately a bit inconvenient for trying to set him up, but it's not bad. He already comes with like pretty solid fodder. You don't really have to reinvent the wheel with him, so he deserves that spot because he has great matchups against a pretty decent size amount of the cast. Now, Leila here is very similar to what I've talked about with Akariss or even Takumi from the previous F2P options, and that is the ability to basically attack stuff for free, cause a lot of new like pressure, damage, debuffs, and whatnot. And on top of that, she can swap out. Now, here's what's really cool about that swap out effect in Arena. It can act like a reposition or a sort of like hit and run effect in Arena where positionals and movement options aren't as good. So if you use Leila at +10, then you can attack something, and if her ally support is within range, she swaps with the allied supported unit, so she potentially gets out of danger there, and then that unit, as long as it hasn't moved, ideally it hasn't moved, if you set it up properly a turn or two in advance, then that one can get out too. So this is again a rare interaction in Arena that is appreciated, and Leila of course deserves a pretty high spot there. Unfortunately, she does get hindered by stuff like far save, which you will see, and she has fallen off a little bit beyond that utility, so like she is more dependent on stat spreads, but is a very powerful option that is near top tier if you ask me. Finally, some of the other options here. Unfortunately, mythics like Ashera and Brammy only score at the 175 bracket, which is, even though they're pretty solid units and like will have pretty good matchups, the problem is that 175 scoring is starting to get outdated, and if you try to be competitive and rank up, you will feel the effect of unfortunately just wanting a unit that scores more. Saving some blessings is nice, and definitely winning and having your arena experience is nice, but it's not the best option, so that's why they're lower than they could potentially be if unfortunately they scored a bit more. Stuff like Corin, Valoria, and Eleonora, again, kind of same idea here. Unfortunately, Eleonora just has a fire sweep effect based on speed, and that's it. No additional effects. So something like Akariss or Leila or Takumi, where if you use something like that, they do chip damage, they're pressuring, dagger debuffs, whereas Eleonora is just I can attack for free, and that's not really enough, but she does deserve a spot on the list, if you ask me. Valoria can set up other units, so she deserves a spot here. Unfortunately, she will be more team dependent. She can't really be thrown into anything, but she's pretty solid as an option as well. And finally, Fallen Corin deserves a spot here just because, again, she uses the dual skill well, uses all the stats, has good solid matchups across the board. Think like Legendary Corin, but you can use them in any season. So that's why I appreciate something like Fallen Corin, because she's going to have pretty solid matchups across the board. Being a colorless dragon, you're not going to run into too much difficulty using her pretty well, combined with a skill that essentially lets her have pretty solid matchups across the board. So let's talk about some of the builds here, starting with Marianne. So I did cover Marianne, but there wasn't a Sea Duel Infantry at that time, and of course I wanted to now talk about it instead. And what we'll do here is basically with Marianne, I feel like in Arena, you're going to want to just keep most of her base kit. Honestly, there really isn't much to change there. And no follow-up, but use it with Flashing Blade so you get that consistency out of her special. 2 charge, if you one-shot something, then you get the special. If you have to double something, and it has like a guard or special fighter, that's fine. Flashing Blade will activate it. Most of the time it's going to work. Her weapon is really nice with no follow-up because it gives her 70% damage reduction, so she's basically not going to be dying to most things. A really solid unit, and giving actions to others is, without saying, very powerful. And I did cover Marianne recently, so I'm not going to spend too much time here with more than that. Now, I did recently talk about Leila, and I wanted to just visualize this for you. Again, Rupture Sky is really good in the game, so if you have access to it, then you're going to want to give it to your favorite character, or whoever one of your highest investments that you plan to use for a long time is. So Rupture Sky, if you have it, use it. With Leila, again, it's a pretty standard build, like do big nukes, swap out. I don't really think there's much to say here. Leila is great because you don't have too much positional skills in Arena, and being able to do that is great. Now, Ashera, again, basically makes the cutoff here, but the lower scoring is a bit harsh. But if you play AR in Arena, then you can probably get yourself some double value here, save some blessings, and have a very powerful arena unit as well, because she essentially scales so well off of allies and buffs and rallies and such you're going to be using in Arena anyways, that she's going to super nuke basically everything she attacks. But it's also really nice that she has a null panic effect and is buffing allies at the beginning of turn with Order's Restraint. So her attack stat easily hits stuff into the like 80s, 90s without a doubt. She has the speeds for Wind Sweep, so it's going to be a really easy Arena experience. But if you play AR in Arena, then it's a pretty solid candidate to just think about Ashera inheriting the Sea Duel Infantry 4 skill, save your blessings, and if you're not using any of the other candidates here at a high investment, or you don't want to spend the feathers or investment or whatever, then Ashera is going to definitely make the list here of who you should give Sea Duel Infantry 4 to. With that being said, folks, that's basically my coverage here on Sea Duel Infantry 4, some of the best candidates, my opinion, of course, a tier list, and I'd love to hear your opinions on this. I'm sure you guys will want to refine it here or there. Again, I want to reiterate that healers don't deserve a spot for Sea Duel Infantry 4. You can do it, but realize that if you're trying to push ranks, you're going to eventually bench that unit because it's just too much of a difference when it comes to scoring. And kind of the same idea with why I can't push the mythics even higher, even though Ashera could probably be in the top, for example. And that's unfortunate. So anyways, thank you for watching if you have, and as always, smash the like button, sub if you haven't already. If you love this content, you want to support it, what we do, subscription, Patreon, that's the best way, man. Love you guys. I will see you in the next one. Peace.
It's over.